Evening, everyone. Welcome to the second in our collaborative series with the Historic Towns Trust. My name is Paul Dryber, and I'm the chair of British Association for Local History. This is actually the first in a sort of two volume set, if you like, of Yorkshire towns, with a Ripon to follow in March. Just to say, I'm just going to appear very briefly before I hand over to our chair for this evening, Professor Sarah Jones. But I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping so you all know where we stand. Just to say, obviously, this is a Zoom webinar platform, which is slightly different from the standard Zoom meetings with which you're all familiar. So you won't be able to see yourself on screen or appear on screen, and you'll be muted throughout. Don't worry about that. Just so we can, get through the webinar as smoothly as possible. At the bottom of your screen, or certainly is on mine, there is a chat function which you can tell us where you're calling in from this evening. I already noticed there's some great geographical range of people attending the lecture this evening, which is fantastic. You can also let us know if you've got any technical issues by using the chat function. You can also see in the bottom bar that there is a Q&A function. That'll be for our question and answer session with our speaker Ian after he's wrapped up this evening. So do continue all the way through the lecture to pop your questions into the Q&A function as we go along, but Ian will answer the questions at the end. I think that's it from me. So I'm now going to hand over to a great friend and former colleague of mine, Professor Sarah Jones. So Sarah is the Professor Emerita at the University of York. She is a trustee of the Historic Towns Trust. And for those of you that know her, she wrote the book on medieval York. So she's a great medieval urban historian. I'm going to hand over to Sarah and I'll enjoy the lecture, everybody.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for that introduction. I think I have two simple jobs this evening. One is to introduce the Historic Towns Trust, and the other is to introduce our speaker. So, first of all, the UK Historic Towns Trust is a registered charity, and we work with local communities across Wales, England, and Scotland to research the history of their town or city and to map it in a beautiful historical map. Our maps, I think I can say, are very attractive, they're affordable, and they're prize winning. And I do hope that you take the opportunity to go to our website, the UK Historic Towns Trust website, and have a look at what's on offer there. It's worth saying we're a very small charity in terms of our endowment. It's really not very large at all, and we have to raise funding for every project that we undertake. And the most important of our new projects, I think, at the moment, is our new map that we're currently making about the city of Bradford. And if you go to our shop online, you'll see there's a little donate button as well. And I'd love you to donate to the Bradford project. Even the price of a cup of coffee, it all helps. Everything helps, honestly. We're making a map of Bradford for a variety of reasons. I suppose the most timely is that it is this year celebrating as the UK's City of Culture, and the map will be published in time for the Bradford Literature Festival in late June as part of, and will be celebrated as part of those celebrations. But also Bradford is an immensely important city in terms of Britain's industrial heritage. One of the most important industrial cities, really, through the early industrial revolution period and into the 19th century. It's been a very, very complicated process to gather all the data to map the rapid growth and change of the town through that industrial era. And we've been very, very lucky, I think, to have the dedicated services entirely voluntarily, I should add, of the distinguished archaeologist from the region, Ian Roberts, who is going to talk to us tonight. Ian was the principal archaeologist at the West Yorkshire Archaeological Advisory Services and clearly got to know the area well during that period, but had previously studied archaeology at the University of Bradford. And he's currently still archaeologist to the cathedral in Bradford, as well as the cathedral in Wakefield. So really nobody knows more about this subject and how to research it. His work is absolutely outstanding. I'm so excited about the map that is forthcoming, and I'm very pleased to hand over to him now. It's going to be a great speech. Thank you.
Right. Can anyone see any images? Because I can't.
Not yet, no. I'm not the right person to give you
Right.
support. I don't know
There we
whether,
go.
have you shared your screen? Oh, something's happening. And if you go into the
Yeah,
presentation mode.
that's it. All right. Sorry about that. Technical hitch already. Right. Good evening. Tonight, I will be talking about the work I've been doing on collating historical information towards the production of the Bradford historical map. Bradford's not, I suspect, the type of town you'd normally associate with an historical map. It's essentially industrial. It's a lot of its history is quite gritty. Nevertheless, it's still a very interesting town, and its development is very remarkable. Tonight, I'll just be sharing some of the insights that have all feature in the map publication. I can't cover it all. There is so much. Many people have said to me, will you find enough information for the map about Bradford? Of course I will. There's too much to include. So then this is the map, or a mock-up of it anyway, that will be published in June. It follows the same format of all the other historic towns maps. And the area covered, well, the main map will cover the centre of Bradford, obviously, but we've got two sub-map areas which we thought were important to include. One is Manningham, which has a big role to play in the later part of the 19th century where Bradford expanded, and also the Undercliff and Peel Park areas up here. Now, basically, including all three maps means that we'll be including all of Bradford's 9 conservation areas. I didn't realise there was 9 conservation areas till I started looking, but Manningham alone has got a conservation area with about 7 or 8 sub areas in its own right. So there's a lot of work gone into Bradford already into its listed buildings and its conservation. In terms of periodization, we've basically got medieval to the dissolution. There won't be many sites of that date. From the dissolution to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, very few sites surviving. And from the Industrial Revolution to 1847. Now, 1847 is a critical date in Bradford's history because it's the point at which Bradford became a corporation. And that signified great changes in the way that the town was managed and governed. And then to 1897, when Bradford became a city. But there is some medieval material to be considered, or sites. The only surviving medieval sites are some medieval phases of the cathedral, parish church of St. Peter over here, and the mill race, or I'll refer to it as the Goit, the mill Goit, throughout this talk. And there's on here that the soak mill for Bradford was situated. It's also where some fulling mills, we think, were situated as well. Bradford Beck, a major feature throughout its history, runs into the town and out of the town in a big U. But the arrangement of the town in the medieval period is interesting. The very early town was focused around the church. It was here that the 14th century manor was situated, the medieval grammar school, and probably the earliest market. And this was all near the church bridge, which crossed Bradford Beck, and an area known as the Broad Ford, from where Bradford gets its name. It later became Broadstones, and a street of that name was created in the 19th century. On the opposite side of Bradford Beck was Kirkgate, where the burgage plots were, the residential area, and on Ivegate and Westgate, where more of the retail elements were situated. At this point here was the old marketplace, obviously later than the one I'm supposing was here, but from the 14th century, the marketplace was here, and it later moved into a more central area, which we'll see in a minute. The other thing to mention about the medieval period, there's another bridge point here called Ives Bridge, and there was a chapel there called St. Sither's Chapel. It was recorded by John Leland in the 16th century, shortly before it was demolished, which is a great pity. But other than that, all we can say about Bradford in the medieval period was that we have documentary evidence for woolen industry. We've obviously got some fulling mills, which we think were here, represented in the documents. We know that there was tanning in many places along the beck, and there was also ironworking. All these things crop up again in the 19th century. This is the foundations for a greater industry in the future. I show this image purely because it demonstrates a thriving wool industry during the Civil War, because the things that they had to hand to defend the church tower during the bombardment by the Royalists in 1642 were wool bales, and they hung them from the church to protect them from the cannonballs. Other than that, we have very little to say about Bradford's history at that time. In the early 18th century, we have an estate map which shows some three-dimensional representations of the houses on Kergate and Ivegate. There's the mills and possibly the fulling mills. And in the middle there is the manor that was built by the Rawson family, the stewards in the 14th century. They moved the manor near the church, had gone out of use in the 14th century, and a new manor was built here in the 15th century. That essentially moved the focus of Bradford away from the church and into the central area to the north of the beck. It's Thomas Jeffrey's map here of the later 18th century. Basically shows a town that hadn't changed much from the late medieval period, perhaps a little bit of more expansion and linear expansion along the main roads. But there's a few things it doesn't show. By 1775, the date of this map, there was industrial evidence around Bradford. The Industrial Revolution reached Bradford in its peripheral areas. It didn't actually affect the centre. One thing that's missing from here is that it might have shown is the canal. It's the Bradford Canal, which was opened in 1774. Bradford was an odd place really for communications. It wasn't on a navigable river. All its communications had been through packhorse routes in the post-medieval period. The turnpikes improved that somewhat, but by the time we get to the late 18th century, with the industrial era starting, the amounts of materials coming through Bradford in and out, just the turnpikes just couldn't cope with it. So a 3-mile canal link was built to the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. It was fed by the Bradford Beck. I don't know if you can make out here. There's a conduit from the beck into the canal. You can see it on this inset here much more clearly. There's a sluice dam and a conduit that goes into the canal. And the canal terminus is here, where there's a warehouse building, very much right in the middle of the centre of the town. This is the church, the parish church, just here, just above it. And by 1792, we have the vitriol works established on the canal. This is one of the oldest chemical works in the country. What was coming into the canal? Well, raw material, raw wool probably for processing. Also, there's the limestone was one of the principal things that was being carried in by bulk. And here are the lime works. There was another one further up the canal. Raw limestone being brought in from the Dales along the Leeds Liverpool Canal onto this Bradford branch, and they were flaking it to make calcium carbonate, so they could then take it by mineral railway through Bradford and down to the south, where it was used in the blast furnaces of the Bowling Ironworks and the Low Moor Ironworks, which were established in the 1780s. This is what the rural scene looked like to the south of Bradford. This is the Bowling Ironworks. The ironworks are here, and at Low Moor were situated in a landscape linked with mineral railways, inclined planes, wagon ways, all things which were taking ironstone and coal from the local mines and for processing, for creating the iron that was needed for the industrial revolution in the region, and particularly in Bradford. The limestone was used, the calcium carbonate was used in the blast furnaces to react with the impurities to create slag, so they could sort of take the impurities out of the iron. The textile industry at Bradford this time was also in the rural areas. It was not in the centre. This is a cottage industry at this time. And what made the textile industry in Bradford particularly profitable was the demand for worsted, made from long fibred wool or long stapled wool, which could be got from most of the sheep in the region. The different parts of sheep produce different lengths of fibre, and that was the wool sorter's job to sort out the long from the short. But it was still a cottage industry, and people were spinning and dyeing at home and making their small pieces. It was usually basically done by tenant farmers who had a second income, and they would make this cloth at their own speed and take it down to the cloth halls in the middle of Bradford. These are the Peace Halls. These were built in 1773. I think this actually is this is the second one. The first one was built in 1773, and these are where the people could come into Bradford and display their cloth in the marketplace. There's a very small scale piecemeal business. Before the Peace Hall was here, the pubs, the inns were the places where people were doing this. In fact, the Peace Halls probably only had currency for about less than 100 years, because when the big merchants started manufacturing in Bradford, they had their own warehouses and they would display their stuff there. And Peace Hall was used for different purposes for many years until it was knocked down in 1934. So the cottage industry was okay, but the people who were supplying the wool, the wool staplers, the money men, they were keen to upscale this industry, and they started off by bringing similar artisans together in one place so they could maximize their output. So they would get these hand combers like this all in one shed doing the work, or they would bring spinners together. And sometimes eventually they started bringing them all together into what you'd call proto mills, probably still rural, but driven by water wheels. But it became imperative soon that if they wanted to maximize their profits, they had to go into the towns. They had to go into the towns because they wanted to be closer to the canal. They wanted to have a market. They also wanted to embrace the new technology, the steam engines, the mechanical devices for combing and spinning. And so it then became a very industrial process. Now, this is Bradford, but how we think it was in 1800. You could see it. The map is very much a rural market town still. You've got the canal here, the church, the Bradford Beck and the Goit. And there's other waterways coming into Bradford, Bowling Beck here, the East Brook. And these are the areas which the textile mills, the worsted mills, were established on. The first area to be colonized by mills was this area on the mill race, on the Goit and Bradford Beck. Only 2 mills are shown here in 1800, and that's the Westholme Mill and Thompson's Mill. But this changed very quickly. In just 48 years, the situation had changed to this. This is the 1848 First Edition Ordnance Survey map. The area I've just shown you for 1800 is in pink. So you can see how Bradford had expanded very rapidly in just 40 or so years. Now, the blue areas are the areas of the earliest worsted mills. This area, here's the one around the Goit, became known as Goit Side, one of the first industrial areas in Bradford. Other areas on the west, on the Bowling Beck. This one, all the mills seem to be called Spring Mill or Spring Side or something like that. Suggests they were exploiting water from the springs. Water was in short supply. Bradford's becks were not large. They didn't provide huge amounts of water. They weren't driving the mills. They weren't mills as such like that. They needed the water to wash the wool, to process it. They needed it to for the steam engines. They also needed the water courses to discharge effluent into. So they were abstracting water, processing it, and putting it back in. And this could have been used by 20 or 30 mills before it reached the town centre. When it reached Bradford's centre, it was probably used again by people in town centre industries, people using it for washing, people using it for drinking even, until it went out the other side. And of course, this highly polluted water that was then conduited into the canal and made the canal a rather noxious and polluted, stagnant affair. And it got worse as time went on. There was an article in a Leeds newspaper around 1850. They thought it worthy to report that somebody had caught a trout in the Bradford Canal under the heading, "Wonders will never cease." That gives you an idea of how it was perceived. This area in yellow, this is an area of worsted mills that didn't come into operation until a bit later. This was along the Horton Beck, where the university was, but you can see it's not really developed at all in the early 19th century. That sort of came later. What you can see between all these blue areas are housing. This is housing for workers, through massive influx of workers into Bradford. The population increased from something like 6,000 to 53,000, just that's in the town in that 48-year period. And the high density housing that the mill owners provided was mainly back-to-back housing. This is not the best sort of housing. It's cheap and it didn't have many facilities, poor sanitation, and of course it all came at a cost. The areas here actually are warehouses between the handy for the canal and later on the stations. Bradford's back-to-backs. This is the Longlands area to the north of Goitside. There were, you can see here, there's water pumps mentioned or a well, and there's maybe only one source of fresh water for every 20 or 30 or so houses. The sanitation report of 1845 reported that each of these back-to-back houses on average was housing about 10 people. There were no toilet facilities other than shared earth closet privies, which I suspect are the individual blocks here and there. And there was no way of getting that rubbish out, that night soil. It was taken out and disposed of on an irregular basis. The problem with these houses as well was that they were often had courtyards and there was not much ventilation for them. And they were blamed, the poor ventilation of them was blamed for all sorts of miasmatic diseases, particularly tuberculosis and bronchitis, which killed about 1 in 6 people. It wasn't a very good place to live, Bradford. I mean, there was lots of other diseases, every disease you could think of, they had it in Bradford, and probably not much different than many other industrial towns in the country at the time. Bradford does seem to be particularly bad. The average age of death in 1840 was 18 years old. Now, because there was so much, well, what are we going to say there? The high population meant there was very little room left, that everything had been developed, all the recreation grounds had been built over. Nobody had thought to provide music halls or things like that. And so recreation for the population, if they had time for it, basically featured around the pubs and the inns. And there was about 50 inns in Bradford in around 1800, mainly coaching inns and alehouses. These were all licensed. But in 1830, the Beer Act came in, and that allowed people to set up alehouses without being licensed, so long as they paid a registration of a couple of shillings a year. And many of the people in Bradford took to this quite readily. And by the 1860s, I think there was something like 400 beer houses in Bradford, and overall 600 places where you could get a drink. The ale houses like this one, the Jolly Butchers, this would have been a secondary income. The butcher would have, probably his wife would have run the beer house. The similar situation occurred in the Masons' Arms, the cathedral, where they were the masons to the churchyard, but they converted part of their property to a beer house, and that was run by the mason's wife. And because it was so easy to get hold of drink did become a problem. One of the objectives of the nonconformist denominations when they moved into Bradford, and they did so in quite a big way in the 18th century, was to try and provide a service for the population, the people who didn't know anybody, there was no social network, didn't have any entertainment. So these churches tried to provide it, and both the Wesleyans and the Baptists came in and this is the old cockpit. They came in without any churches, but both of them in succession used the old cockpit as a makeshift chapel, and this is the Octagon Chapel on it's near the university, but it didn't survive long enough for us to appreciate it. It was felt to be too small. It's a funny thing because both the Anglicans and the nonconformists all had these ambitions to. It was a bit of a turf war, really, because there were so many new people coming into Bradford, and they thought they could provide them with what they needed, social network, a service. They thought they could also help them combat their drinking. The truth of the matter seems to be that not actually many people went to church. Only about 25% of the population, and 65% of those were middle class. The big problem was that the hours of working that were required in the textile mills were prohibitive to anybody doing it much else other than go to the pub. What the churches and the chapel did do was provide schools, both day schools and Sunday schools by the Church of England and the nonconformists, but they weren't regulated. They all did different things for different hours. And added to that, after the 1833 Factory Act, that was something that was campaigned for by Richard Osler, who basically accused the textile, the mill owners as child slavery, accused them of child slavery. The Factory Act demanded that all children under the age of 13 who were working in mills had to have 2 hours of schooling a day. And in Bradford, we've seen the appearance of these two schools, this factory model school, which isn't actually attached to a factory, but it's just in an area of back-to-back housing, and this industry school of industry for girls. We know a bit more about that. The idea of these schools seemed to be to take children out of their environments which was possibly encouraging them to go off the rails, and take them in hand and teach them the things they thought they needed to learn. And of course, for girls, that was sewing and cooking and cleaning. These are the only two I've seen actually that are mapped, which is odd, which probably means that the factory owners didn't take it that seriously, but probably made sure that their child workers went to one of the chapel schools, because there was plenty of those. (1647) was a pivotal year. I think I said that at the beginning. This was a time when Bradford Corporation came into being. Before that, Bradford had been run by a series of commissioners who really probably weren't up to the task of organising a town on the scale that Bradford had become. It embarked after the Bradford Improvement Act of 1850. The corporation embarked upon a series of improvements to obviously address the problems they've got with sanitation, illness, and there was a bit of, I suppose, a bit of elitist self-interest in this as well, because most of the people who were officers or of the corporation were also mill owners, and they did not want their employees being sick and dying early. So we do get a series of improvements at this stage, and I will go through how some of these improvements took place and the impact of them. Interestingly, these images reflect Bradford in a rather bucolic setting, looking from the northeast. William Cownes painting. Ironically, this is Bradford at its worst. Just before the improvements started. It hadn't expanded then, but this is Bradford. I don't know if this is propaganda or not. There's quite a lot of paintings of Bradford that look like this, which have the smoking chimneys in the background. This is Bradford by the London Illustrated News in 1873. This is what Bradford had become after it expanded and improved, but they clearly painting it as a, certainly because of the format of the picture and the medium it's in, but gives the dark satanic mill view of Bradford. But here you can see how this is the canal, and this is the canal basin here. The church is just here, it's there, and it's all developed. And this is the northward expansion into the Manningham area, which we'll look at in a minute. This is Bradford in 1850. So expansion was a big part of Bradford's improvement strategy. All these estates here in the green are mill owners' estates, basically. And these are all the estates which they sold up when they saw that there was an opportunity. And they moved further out. And what they did on these estates was build houses, mostly houses, to house the new people of Bradford, because the population kept rising again. In another 50 years, it had risen to over 100,000. There was a bit of a change, I suppose, in the way who was living where, because what was happening is that the middle classes were moving out of the centre, and into the centre a lot of Irish and other immigrants were coming in, and there was, in terms of the churches, the Roman Catholics churches seemed to take it increase in that period. Anyway, I'll have a look at some of these estates. So I'm going to look at the Manville, Eastbrook, and Bolton Royd. This is out in the Manningham area. Manningham, by the way, was a medieval township in its own right. Both Bradford and Manningham were mentioned in the Domesday Book, so they've got quite a pedigree. So look at Manville. Manville was one of the earliest houses built in mansion, I should say, built in Bradford by John Mann, a wool merchant, and he sold up in about 1860. But prior to that, the Bradford cricket ground had also sold up, and this is the plan for the auction of 1864 to sell off the Manville in lots. You can see that the cricket ground had already begun to be developed. It became a road called Claremont, in which the composer Delius lived at one point. And this is how the area developed. Claremont, those nice semi-detached villas, whereas the Manville area became through terraces. These were These weren't back-to-backs. Back-to-backs, in actual fact, were for a time banned. They wouldn't build anymore between 1860 and 65 because they thought they weren't healthy enough. They did actually start building them again after that, but most of the houses you'll find in Bradford built after 1850 tend to be through terraces. They thought they had better ventilation. This is the School of Art here. This was built on the site of the Manville Mansion. It started off as a Methodist chapel, a New Connection chapel, but eventually became the School of Art and the Regional School of Art eventually. And that was where David Hockney studied for a time. This is the Eastbrook House to the east of Parish Church. You can see here, this is 1802. Edmund Peckover bought this land from the church. It was part of the glebe. And he built a huge garden around it. He too was a wool merchant and later a banker. And it was all taken over by the 1870s because it was developed by Little Germany. All the warehouses that were built for the merchants. There's a strong connection with Bradford's worsted trade and yarns with Germany, and a lot of German merchants moved into the area. And this whole area to the east of the church was developed for their warehouses and a few mills as well. But you can see here, this is the surviving bit of Eastbrook House, the hall. It became part of a mill building and then had an inn attached to it, the Eastbrook Mill. Now, you can still see the part of the house today. The inn has gone, but you can see it had an upper floor attached, which was part of the mill buildings. Bolton Royd. Now, this was one of the first mansions in the Manningham area to be created. It had huge grounds, big fish ponds, and when its owner died, another mill owner, I can remember his name. The family again sold off the lands, this time into small lots for villas. They built these villas with alternate Italianate and Gothic frontages, and this is thought to have been the blueprint for the way a lot of Manningham then developed, because this was the place where the middle classes wanted to live. This was where the Lister Park was. There are a lot of recreational opportunities here. And it was out of the centre of Bradford, the unhealthy centre. Nobody wanted to live there. The Bolton House itself still survives as a care home. It's just an example of some of the through terraces that you'll see all around Bradford today. These are a product of the later 19th century. Back-to-back still survive, but they're all been a bit modified now, and they'll be the later form of back-to-backs mostly. One of the things that the corporation wanted to do was to improve sanitation, improve supplies of fresh water. Water was in very big demand, and there was very little of it in Bradford. The Bradford Waterworks had provided a service to the reservoir at Wetley Hill in the first half of the 19th century, but it didn't have many outlets. Not many houses were suitable for it. And in the second part of the 19th century, when Manningham was developed, they were building houses with running water and flushing toilets. and sewers. And so the new new reservoir at Heaton came into its own, and they were bringing this water in from about 25 kilometers away. There actually had been a water supply from 1753, but it had only gone to a cistern at the top of Westgate. And I think it came in wooden pipes. It was a service that was quite irregular and very limited. Now they started digging sewers in 1860, but they didn't have a sewage works until 1874. Bradford was very slow at getting its infrastructure sorted out. I mean, it was quite a big town by the time they started, and so it was very difficult uh, to get everything sorted. The sewage works here at Manningham, you can see it lies on Bradford Beck. That's very convenient, next to the canal. When they finally got this sewage works online, they found that about 20 million gallons of effluent were coming into it on a daily basis, and it just couldn't cope. And so the vast majority of it was going straight into the Bradford Beck. That sounds familiar. They did actually, by 1915, expand this sewage works to have greater capacity, and they also built a new one at nearby Esholt. But it was a slow business. Part of the problems with all of this was that much of Bradford's housing stock in the centre of Bradford, it was still back-to-backs, even though they'd stopped building new ones. There wasn't the infrastructure to do it. You couldn't supply a back-to-back with a running water supply and a flushing toilet if they didn't have any drainage. And so for a long time, it was still earth closet toilets, privies, and removing night soil. And I think what they tried to do was to make sure that the rubbish and the night soil could be more regularly removed to remove the sanitation issue or improve the sanitation issue. Gas and electricity were also provided. Gas was around by the 1850s. Electricity didn't come in until the 1890s. Bradford, these are electricity works and gas works in between the canal and the Bradford Beck in what's called Bradford Dale. Oh, that's Bradford City football ground there. Bradford was one of the first local authorities to actually run an electric lighting firm, so I think that was a first. For me, one of the biggest indicators in how fast Bradford was growing and how difficult it was for them to accommodate this growth is the quarries on the north side of Bradford. Here, several quarries, some of them were disused, but one in particular, Copy Quarry, was still operating. It was operating since 1830 and it didn't stop till 1860. But these quarries were actually overtaken by urban development. They were enveloped by it, but they still kept building around them. Didn't seem to be an issue. Here, this is the development plan for 1845, showing how even then they were planning to build around a quarry that was still expanding until 1860. See here, this is the quarry with its gins to hoist the stone out, its coal yard, weighing machine, and the houses that are being built on a precipice. They're right up against the quarry edge, and this is a quarry that is reportedly 30 meters deep. And the reason why people were coming out and building around this quarry and not being too bothered about it was they were desperate to get out of the centre of Bradford. They needed to get away from the pollution and the bad smells and the health hazards. So they came and lived in Copy Quarry. Bramwell Bronte lived in Fountain Street, which is just the next street up here. He had a studio there. People were quite happy to come and live here. But of course, after the quarry ceased extraction in 1860, it needed infilling. And what they started infilling it with was rubbish and night soil. The privies of Bradford were being emptied into Copy Quarry. So everybody who thought they were escaping all the bad smells suddenly found they'd caught up with them. And there's a lot of letters in the papers, naturally, people complaining about the smells, the health hazards, and particularly the language of the night soil porters. I think in 1868, there was another outcry because something called the dog collar law came in. And this was, I think, a response to the increase in urban dog ownership. And people were expected to pay a fee to have the dog, a bit like a license fee. And many people didn't want to do it. And they killed their dogs and dumped them in the quarry. And of course, there was a piece in the newspaper about dozens of these dogs being dumped in there, putrefying away in the summer heat. And it does not sound like, it's not a good look for a corporation who was trying to carry out an improvement plan. Of course, it eventually did get filled in. And for a long time, this is 1890, nothing was built on it. This looks like there was something built on it, but in actual fact, the land was so uncompacted. It was still subsiding, I suppose, still settling. This building here is a wooden structure. It was the new music hall, which was thought to be light enough not to have a problem with unconsolidated land. And that was in existence probably for about 15 to 20 years until it burnt down. And then after that, the land was just left open until the area became the Rawson's open market in 1930. The railways had a big impact on the way Bradford developed. Of course, the railways themselves, but the stations in particular. Bradford's first stations came along in the 1846, all around the middle of the century. And they effectively did away with the canal. The canal was pointless after that. Everything went by rail. Adolphus was a passenger station which was found to be too far out from the centre and became a goods station. City Road there provided an outlet for the goods on the Thornton Road mills and dye works up here. Bridge Street is probably the most interesting one of all these. This had been an area, a plot of land occupied by a series of worsted mills, the Sion Chapel, the Neptune Inn, quite a complex of buildings, and it all disappeared under the Bridge Street goods station. At the same time as the town hall was built in 1873 as well. So quite an upheaval in the centre of Bradford. You can see how the stations modified the way the area looked. Of course, the mills were changing constantly. They were always either changing their use, expanding, modifying for different things. In the late 19th century, worsted it didn't become unfashionable. It's just that exports of worsted became difficult because partly of US tariffs, in actual fact. But they did manage to keep going by concentrating on worsted yarn. But many mills, and this Bradford's probably best known mill, Manningham Mill. This was started developing machinery for silk weaving, and that became very successful. That was Samuel Cunliffe Lister, one of the bigwigs of Bradford, who actually sold his house to become Cartwright Hall in Lister Park. But mills weren't changing on a large scale. It's quite remarkable how the mills, even small ones, could change in a matter of years. This was a dye house on the mill Goit, owned by the North brothers. 10 years later, it's a sizing house. We don't see sizing houses on their own, apart from this one. They're probably integral parts of mills normally. And then by 1890, it's a cotton and silk mill. Cotton and silk is one of the things they moved away towards after the Worcester market dropped a bit. Other things they used are alpaca and recovered wool as well. The only reason you'd know that the Goit was still there is the little triangle in the corner. It's the only bit of the Goit that's left uncovered by 1890. In fact, the whole of the Goit is now covered, as are all the becks. You can't see any of them in Bradford Centre. You'd think, in amongst all the improvements, that the safe place things would be the churches. That wasn't the case. The Anglican churches seem to be very vulnerable to the improvements. This is Christ Church, built in 1813, in a bend in the road at Darley Street. It wasn't provided with a churchyard, but it did have the fairground around it, as you can see here. Why it had the fairground around it, I've no idea, but the fact that it didn't have a churchyard meant that when they wanted to do away with the church and move it in 1878 to accommodate a new street plan, it wasn't hampered by the fact that there were human remains associated with it. They wanted to move Christ Church for this plan here, so they could run a straight street right the way through. In doing that, it had to come down. They compulsorily purchased the church for £10,000, and the Church of England promptly went off and bought Hallfield, which is a mansion on the north side of the town, which had been built by Francis Sharp, the occupier of Horton Hall, who built it for a country retreat for his sisters in 1800. Which gives you an idea of the nature of Bradford at that time. The Christ Church was built next to Hallfield Chapel, and it stayed there till the early 20th century, until it was both the chapel and Christ Church were knocked down, and they're now a gymnasium. St John's Church on Manchester Road, another one that bit the dust. It lasted even less time. I think Christ Church lasted 66 years. This didn't do that at all. It went out of use within, what's that, 32 years of being built. And the reason why a lot of these churches, a case could be made to remove them, was they didn't have the congregations. A lot of the middle classes who went to church had already departed from the centre, and they'd gone to Manningham, and a lot of these buildings were redundant. They were redundant as soon as they were built. This one was replaced by the Prince's Theatre, and it probably got more people in that than it did in the church. A lot of buildings designed to show Bradford's civic pride went up in the second half of the 19th century. St George's Hall in 1853, a music hall, and the Town Hall in 1873. two of the major landmarks still in the centre of Bradford, both designed by Lockwood and Mawson, the premier architects of Bradford. Bradford was blessed with a lot of good architects at that time. They're all locals, and they were all had their specialities. Some were used to build churches, others warehouses and schools, but they didn't stint. They're all Gothic, Italianate, Greco styles that or hybrids of both, all of the three. It did a remarkable set of buildings. We're going up all over the place. Where they didn't actually do such a good job was in the centre of Bradford, in the middle of old Bradford, Foster Square, where the town's oldest core was ripped out to create Foster Square, commemorating or named after W.E. Foster, the MP, and who've done quite a lot for education. But they created basically a communications hub for the tram network and for the Midland Station, and they built a new post office building, St. Peter's House, which was well, it had the effect of basically marginalising the church. It cut the church off from the town, and it's Foster Square itself has now gone, as we'll see in a bit later. The other notable achievement from the time is the creation of a new cemetery at Undercliff. This was this was created because most of all of the city centre churchyards were full by the middle of the 19th century, and they were themselves becoming a health hazard. Undercliff was created to accommodate both non-conformist and Church of England burials, and it was divided up into grids. The suffix C indicates Church of England. The suffix U stands for unconsecrated. Sorry, consecrated and unconsecrated. And each half of this burial ground had its own chapel of rest for unconsecrated and consecrated. You can see them. This was a plan that was drawn up when they wanted to expand the burial ground westwards, which never happened. It was the site of Airedale Chapel, Airedale College, which actually went for housing development eventually. So housing was far more important than more burial space. But the resultant burial ground is a remarkable thing. It was for all people, not just for the elite, but it's the elite monuments which get all the attention and why it's so important. A lot of unmarked burial grounds up there as well, but these are certainly worth visiting. The drinking problem did not go away. There was a temperance movement. A couple of temperance hotels was known. This is the old manor actually in the marketplace, which was used as a temperance hotel for a while. And one of the big initiatives was the creation of coffee houses by the Bradford Coffee House Tavern Company. There was over 30 of these. How the efficacy of them is debatable, but they certainly attracted people into them. Some people think they've got places where they went after they've been to the pub, but I don't know. What did change the drinking habits of people of Bradford, and I suppose everywhere else, was the First World War, because after that drinking hours were restricted, beer was weaker, and the number of pubs was reduced. That did have a big effect on Bradford. From about 600 hostelries, they've reduced it down to about 350. So that did have a big impact. One of the big successes, I think, of Bradford was their schooling. I talked earlier about the church schools, but they were unregulated. There was no control over what they taught. But when the Bradford School Board came into being, they built a number of new schools, very elaborate. There's Feversham one here, and they offered the same broad curriculum to everybody. Even the poor were able to go to school. They weren't charged for it. And one of the biggest firsts for Bradford was the Wapping School, built in 1877. This was the first school in England to have a swimming pool, and fortunately the school's become a bit dilapidated now. But there was so much more going on at Bradford, the pioneering of school meals, secondary education, nursery provision, a lot of the work that Margaret Macmillan was doing to clinics, medical inspections. Some of this wasn't acted upon until the early 20th century, but it was being talked about and promoted in Bradford at the beginning of the 20th century. So the other thing that happened at the beginning of the 20th century is that they finally got round to addressing the slum problem. As I've said, a lot of Bradford's housing stock couldn't be upgraded because it didn't have the infrastructure. But one of the problems had been that many people at the corporation thought that the way forward was philanthropy, until Fred Jowett came along as a councillor and later became an independent Labour MP. In 1906, he promoted the idea of basically getting rid of a lot of these old houses in the Goitside area, the Longlands, slums, and replacing them with new housing, this 2 and 3 level housing. And this was a big change. This was the beginning of something else for Bradford. But it took the 20th century before this started to happen. I think I'm well over time, but I better finish now. This is Foster Square again. I mentioned it earlier. As an archaeologist, it always surprised me that this was the only archaeological excavation ever to be carried out in Bradford, in the town anyway. And this whole area for the Broadway development was investigated in lots of locations with trial trenches. Only at this area did anything survive, a little island of survival. And what was in it was the remains of the Woolpack Inn, built upon a late medieval foundation. So it obviously had a greater depth of history than we knew. Wells, conduits, evidence of ironworking, but the most dominant feature was the stone plinth from Richard Osler's statue, which had been removed in 1929 to a place called Nutter Place, but they've left the plinth behind. I think I'll finish on that. Thank you.
Ian, thank you. That was terrific, and I know you've only touched the tip of the iceberg, having read your draft gazetteer and so on. That
Yeah.
600 with 600 entries. I know that you've just given us the highlights there. So thank you very much indeed. Before I hand over to Jude for questions and answers, I just wanted to ask you one question, which you won't be surprised by, I don't think, which is, you've emphasised how rapidly the townscape of Bradford is changing through the 19th century, and that must present a challenge when you're trying to map it. And I just wondered if you wanted to indicate some of the ways in which you've sort of attempted to square that circle.
Okay. When you look at Bradford in terms of its development and the changes, where you can sort of see a major change around 1850, it's good that you have the first edition Ordnance Survey, which shows it at that time. And then you've got the second edition, the 1890 survey, which shows how it had developed. The problem is, of course, that a lot of the things that happened in Bradford were short term. They didn't last for long. And so a lot of things that were built between the mapping periods and they disappeared before the Ordnance Survey got round to them. So that means that estate plans, a lot of the development plans that were drawn up, a lot of maps which are residing in Bradford archives are very important for this. And I've been able to see some of them, and it's quite an eye-opener to see. I mean, the things that are mapped, for instance, around, I've seen some maps around the corn mill, the soak mill, and what you see on the Ordnance Survey doesn't do it justice. In amongst all the development areas there are little schools and things like this which don't appear anywhere else on the record. I think you could do an awful lot more work on this and come up with a rather different set of information. But there's a lot of, because there's a lot of development in Bradford, there are a lot of development plans, but they're not, you do have to dig for them. And I think you could spend a lot of time in archives finding that out. But yeah, it's a problem.
Thank you. Well, I know you've done a terrific job, and we always hope that our maps will inspire more research. And so thank you very much.
I think more research is needed.
Jude, shall I hand over to you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Oh, Ian, that was fantastic. I mean, yeah, I'm a Yorkshire person and go to Bradford regularly, and it was just wonderful to hear the massive amount of work you've done. Can I just say before I ask the questions, anybody who's asking questions in the chat, etc., can you put them in the Q&A, and then I can access them more easily than ploughing through the chat comments. But loads of wonderful comments as you'd expect, Ian. So there's 3 questions at the moment, 2 from the same person. So I'll fire away with those. From A.E. Milton Worsell. Do you know if any of the large houses that were redeveloped in the late 19th century had originally been sites of religious houses in the Middle Ages? And this is because he's mentioned, or she's mentioned, the fish ponds.
The only ones that are, the only medieval houses that I know of were the 2 at Little Horton Green.
Right.
And they, of course, burnt down or were demolished. Yeah. There's a lot of mansions on the north side of Bradford at the bottom end of Manningham Lane at the beginning of the 19th century, but I don't think any of them were medieval.
Right.
In fact, the earliest you ever hear them being talked about is late 18th century. So Paper Hall is obviously the earliest one everybody knows of in Bradford. But
yeah, thank you. So might people have had fish ponds in their very large mansions? Might they have chosen?
There were fish ponds at Undercliff. There was a fish pond at Dalton Royd. There was, yeah, they all had these fish ponds and boating lakes and things. But
yes,
I don't think I don't think I could say that any of them were medieval though.
Okay. Thanks very much. And then his or her other question was, what were they quarrying when you mentioned the quarries?
Oh, right. Sandstone.
Yeah.
It's all sandstone in Bradford on the north side. I don't think they quarry much else. It's mainly coal mines to the south and ironstone and sandstone to the north. Of course, the big quarries were on the opposite side of Bradford Dale at Cliff Wood. But these little quarries, it's remarkable, the little quarries that still existed. You see some of the second edition Ordnance Survey maps, they can see the new streets being created in the Manningham area, and they just stop abruptly at the edge of a quarry. The street carries on eventually because they must have filled the quarry in, but
Yeah, how interesting.
I don't think they were dumping rubbish in the mall. They were dumping rubbish in the Water Lane quarry, because that says on the map, it says rubbish.
Oh,
The copy quarry information all came from the Bradford Observer.
right. Thank you very much. So I hope that's answered those questions. And then from David Taylor, what factors drove the massive increase in population from 1800 to 1845? What was special about Bradford?
That's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've asked myself this, and
Mm,
why Bradford? I was thinking a few weeks ago, and it's a difficult one because Bradford didn't have much going for it in many respects. No navigable river, no decent roads.
mhm,
It didn't have. It didn't necessarily have an industry that would suddenly bloom and become the worsted capital of the world, which is how it was, Worcesterdopolis. In
mhm.
fact, if you read what William Cudworth says in his book called Worcesterdopolis, he basically claims that Bradford grew like this because of the coincidence of good soft water, the coal, and the iron to make the mills and the machinery that was needed. It doesn't say much about the wool, though, because you need long staple wool to make worsted. And when everything got going in a big way, they were importing merino wool from Australia. So there must have been enough around the Bradford area to kick this industry off. But once it reached a critical point, they had to import. And I think this is
Yeah.
wool coming down the canal would have been a big point. But yeah, I don't really know why Bradford and what it was about Bradford that made it
Mhm.
so much the place that it just the way a freak of history, I don't know, but it could have been any of the industrial towns, but they all sort of had their own specialities.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so interesting because like Leeds is just kind of next door, and
Yeah,
that has got the navigable river, etc., etc.
yeah.
So yeah, it is. It's a
That's it.
mystery.
It's a little bit of an enigma
Yeah,
for me.
and then this one kind of leads on really nicely. This question: why did Bradford outgrow Huddersfield and Halifax?
Uh, oh dear. Um, Difficult to know, really. Perhaps Bradford just acquired that critical mass of people and
Yeah.
industry that
Mm,
was a rolling stone. It acquired the market, it collared the market, and went with it. And because it had picked Worcester as its thing, that was
yes.
a very profitable product.
Mm.
Profitable.
It was an incredibly wealthy city, wasn't it, Ian?
Yeah, yeah, extraordinary. The fastest growing city in Britain between was it 1830 and 1870. So it had a gravity. It was pulling things in.
Yeah. And then that leads on to the final question that we've got from David Cairns. Who influenced the growth? In many towns, it was elites, and often from elsewhere, for example, English elites in Wales. Who were the elites who made Bradford grow?
Well, it's interesting one that it's not. it's not the landowning classes, because they were the conservative Church of England. The mill owners were liberal nonconformists, and they were the people that had all the money, and they were the ones that it was their money that was building all the nonconformist chapels as well as all the mills. Bradford's always had a bit of an edgy side. It wasn't shy of a riot or a strike. I haven't mentioned any of those, but you know, there was some. The Chartist movement was very big in Bradford.
Yes.
Um,
Were they indigenous, the elites? You know, some of them would be, wouldn't they? Or not?
yeah, I imagine so. Yes. A lot of them were bankers as well. You see, they were the money men. They
Yeah.
knew how to control the markets, I suppose. And
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So there's a question I will let. There's one sneaked into the chat, but it kind of is to do with this. What about the German industrialists? Did they
yeah,
not have an important economic impact?
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the market with Germany was huge. Um, the fact that they had so many import warehouses or export warehouses, I suppose, over here, encouraged a lot of German, particularly German Jews, to come into Bradford, and they took up some quite prominent positions in society.
Mm.
Uh,
Well,
why they thought the need to be here, I don't know. Rather than run it at arm's length, it's another aspect of Bradford's history that's
it,
is
it
quite,
is, isn't it? Yet another aspect.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Well, it's been fabulous, Ian. We've taken up a lot of your time, and it's been absolutely fascinating. If you hang on a minute when everyone's left, I've got one thing here just to mention from somebody, if that's okay with you.
Sure, sure.
Thank you. So, was there anything else you wanted to say, Ian?
No, I think so. I've already said enough.
Right. Um, Anything you need to add, Paul Dryber? No.
No, sorry, no,
Oh,
it's fine. Carry on.
yeah. Okay. So thank you everybody for coming to this fabulous Historic Towns Trust talk. And I'll just remind everybody that the next one is Ripon. If I can find the right piece of paper from all the notes I've made. Um, so we've got a meeting. I lost my piece of paper, Paul, where I had this written down. Yes, 25th of March. We've got another webinar on Ripon for the Historic Towns Trust. And then on the 29th of April, Chester. So two more really interesting talks. So thank you, everybody.